Was geht, mein Zwillingsalter und untote Mädels? Welcome to The World is My Burrito, a podcast that reaches for the stars, fueled by the flesh of its listeners. Yes, you. It's been a while since we last talked, and I probably messed that up, but you're listening to Mars Madness Session 2, covering Yukito Kishido's ongoing manga Battle Angel Alita, Mars Chronicles. The journey of two very young girls and a colorful cast of characters on a war-torn, politically unrested Mars, which is probably red due to all the bloodshed. I hope you like backstory, because this backstory to the original Battle Angel Alita manga has even more backstory within it. And before you shut off this episode because you've never read Alita, don't worry, it is not necessary. As always, I'm your Künstler, Corey T, coming at you from the surface of Florida on this fine, 2nd of July, 2024. For the sake of sanity, I am going to call the characters and locations by the names provided in this tale, and I'm not really going to go into any further detail on that end. For those familiar with the Alita universe, you know why. For those unfamiliar with this universe, don't sweat it. It's not going to matter. The less you know, the less confused you're going to be. I guess there's only a couple of dishes or two to be done, so let's do dish duty. When I started this episode, I had an announcement about a secret guest spot on another podcast, but that has now been out for several weeks. So if you want to go check out the Wait For It podcast, Mr. Eric Almighty and Phil the Filipino did an interview with me. It was a ton of fun. Go check them out, the Wait For It podcast, anywhere you listen to podcasts. I've also recently done some Ghibli episodes of Podcasters Assembled and the Jaws 3 for Podcasters Disassembled. I don't think that's out yet. But yeah, in a few months, I'll also announce another very unique podcast project that I'm working on with some good friends. That said, sorry this took so dang long to release. The short end of the excuse is I initially thought this was 2 volumes. It is not. Following that was a pretty bad shoulder injury that lasted for 2 weeks, during which time I was also working at conventions and repairing my motorcycle. Like, had to take part of it apart and put it back together again. And then 4 weeks of traveling. Also, I read through this twice, which takes up a lot of time. There's more, but I'll save that for Nacho Business. The other 2 Mars Madness titles will still be completed because it's kind of nice to have something resembling a plan. So yeah, up next you can look forward to Terra for Mars. Let's spring in right into the ingredients with the synopsis. Yoko, a full cyborg, and Erika, part cyborg, are on a journey to experience all of the amenities Mars has to offer, including, but not limited to, societal and atmospheric collapse as a result of past wars and devious alliances between corrupt kingdoms, bounty hunters, and other factions, betrayal by friends, family, sworn protectors, and lovers alike, the brutal murder of everything they love, including stuff that only exists in the mind, compelling, fleshed-out villains, some with tragic backstories, others with male energy befitting a Greek letter. Lastly, all kooky cyborgs, profuse German vernacular, and space Nazis. All of this takes place in a kind of neoclassic, Western, kind of post-World War I, kind of dystopian cyberpunk atmosphere. Hot take? I recommend it. It's violent, it's goofy. You know the James Gunn style of film direction where characters do something kind of serious only to follow it up with like a one-liner or funny action so that nothing can ever have a lingering effect? This is that, but with the gloves off. You'll read this cute little story arc that ends with senseless, bloody violence, or maybe one chapter ends with genocide and self-sacrifice while the next turns into a Goonies or Indiana Jones adventure. This is exemplified in the first volume, so in every following volume, you're kind of just waiting for it to happen again. And it does, but never quite in the same way. It does not hold back on either side of the moral pendulum, and Kishido has somehow found not only the perfect balance, but the best way to upset his own balance without ever truly losing the reader. The story doesn't offer a ton of psychological depth, which also kind of added to the problem of making the episode. I need to get better at letting go and accepting what's in front of me and not trying to find something that isn't actually there. As for the German elephant in the room, are you worried about popping into the third installation of this franchise? Don't be. I read the prior two series 6 years ago, which was plenty of time to forget just about everything. At no point did I feel like I was being shamed for entering without previous knowledge. Now might also be a good time to explain this episode's intro. There are a lot of German words in here. But don't worry, between many peppered footnotes throughout and translation notes at the end of each volume, you will not get lost. Seriously, this is possibly the most welcome prequel slash sequel you'll ever read. Kishido obviously respects his readers, both old and new. Hey, final note, and I know this is going to blow someone's mind. The Japanese were allied with Germany during World War II. I bring this up because of a recent Gundam thread where someone was complaining about the constant Nazi influence in that series and thankfully got dragged. It's a real history that a previous generation of Japanese forced upon its nation, and pop culture will always adopt what it knows and can easily access. Now, why did I choose this topic? Humble Bundle released the entirety of the original Battle Angel Alita, the second series Last Order, and volumes 1 and 2 of Mars Chronicles back in 2018 as part of their Kodansha Comics bundle. I read all of Alita and Last Order in one weekend, like just 3 days. Like, bought it, cracked it open, totally consumed. It's a very good, fun, lengthy journey. Now, obviously, I also picked this because it has Mars in the title. And because I have the dumb, it took me a while to realize those 2 volumes were part of an ongoing story, as previously mentioned. The creator of the Alita series is Yukito Kishido, born March 20th, 1967. There's not really a lot of information on him. Wiki doesn't have anything, and his own personal profile on his website reads like a Tinder profile. I'll show some images in the YouTube version of this episode because it is absolutely worth seeing. So, moving on to manga history, where I will barely combine a minutia of character history because the backstory, this story, is the focus, so knowing everything that follows is kind of pointless. If you didn't know Battle Angel Alita and Last Order even existed, you may not feel compelled to look any further. Not yet anyways. Battle Angel Alita first appeared in Bijinesu Janpu, aka Business Jump, in 1990, got a 2-episode OVA aimed at Americans in 1993. Completed the first story in 95, then continued in Battle Angel Alita Last Order, which ran from 2000 to 2010 in Ultra Jump. Then switching to and completing an Eveningu, or Evening, in 2014. Our subject began on October 28th, 2014, in Evening, a bi-weekly manga magazine. That physical magazine ended in 2023 when Kodansha made way for the app/website Komiku Days, or Comic Days. All of the aforementioned magazines are publications of Kodansha. Alita is a Kodansha baby. The franchise is aimed at the seinen, or 18 and up demographic, due to the violence and some nudity. There are currently 9 completed volumes available in English, with continuing chapters being published on the Japanese Kodansha app. If you're fine with scanlations and names that are a little different than the official publication, you may continue the story on forums thanks to the extremely dedicated fan base. And as like kind of a quick summation, Volume 1 introduces us to life on Mars. Volume 2 briefly goes back to the future following the events of Last Order, which piques interest in that title, but if you didn't know that title existed, also shows you where these characters are in 200 years, giving you a little bit more of a reason to care about these literal children. Volumes 3 through 6 continue the introductory arc, then 7 begins a new arc. If you don't want this burrito spoiled, then leave it outside your environmentally controlled biodome, where it averages a cool negative 64 degrees Fahrenheit or negative 53 degrees Celsius. Now for the meat of the episode. As usual, we're not covering everyone or everything, but here are my standout bits. The characters. Nobody is in control of this tale. It's common for the paths taken by heroes and stories to be influenced by outside forces, but they always push forward and find a way to their end goal. There is no end goal here, so there is no way. It seems like initially Dr. Finch might be their external navigator, but that also gets thrown out the window pretty quickly. I think there are fireworks going off, so if you hear some pops, that ain't me. Our primary characters, once again, literal children, are just kind of there. Yoko is a blob, while Erika is the feisty one who embodies fuck around and find out. Being a child, she does not learn from the finding out, so fuckery abounds. She guides much of the story, but never with intent. Her introduction makes her out to be bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, with a history of being separated from her loving family after some kind of attack, after which she and Yoko find each other and adopt each other. Turns out she's great at forgetting extremely traumatic events, so much so that she forgets watching all of the girls in the orphanage get brutally murdered in front of her. Afterwards, we learn her father, mother, and dog were total pieces of shit whom she murdered or assisted in murdering because of how badly they treated her. After all of this is shoved back into her memories, kind of forcefully, she clings harder to Yoko, who is almost immediately taken from her. From the upbringing backstory, we know that Erika has always been devious, but the Yoko removal really amps it up. Her misremembered fantastical past life was something of a one-up against Yoko. The reveal that she doesn't actually have a great family or any at all means she loses that status, then loses the person she was trying to kind of push down. This is when we get to see her twisted mind bloom. She is so envious when Yoko gets not only a beautiful mother, but learns of her royal status, that she works to thwart what has already happened almost as soon as it happens. After this is when she meets Baron Muster, who is probably the best worst childhood influence and most compelling villain so far. And before going on to him, I'll complete my thoughts on her. Her shenanigans caused the deaths of so many good characters in the first arc. Even in the second arc, she clearly hasn't learned and keeps putting herself and Yoko in danger, then blames it on the people she betrayed, or can't understand why she is betrayed by those she previously used as tools. It may seem like a dumb method of progression, but the little bit of future story we get in Volume 2 alludes that Erika is the type who always blames the wrong people and never learns. She is directly operating the machine that keeps her on the wrong side of the tracks. For 200 years she does this. On Muster, he's similar to a young Char Aznable from Gundam. Muster does kill a lot of people, but most of them were who is wrong with society. Namely, the insanely wealthy rulers and their representatives who somehow never suffer from the problems of their people. His tragic backstory of multiple betrayals, attempted murders, and torture by having hydrofluoric acid poured on his legs by friends and respected figures alike gives him some pretty solid foundation for becoming a psychotic murderer with a really good revenge tale. His coolest twisted feature is his recycling and engineering prowess. Instead of just burning the bodies of the dead or maybe just leaving them to rot, he goes to areas where tragedy has befallen, strips them of their clothing, crystallizes them with a fictional powder, runs them through a compactor and centrifuge, uses the dust to create clay, then forms that clay into bricks, leading us to the best line of the manga so far. And thus, without realizing it, the people of Mars are all living in houses built of human bricks. It's great. It's a wonderful line. That's a solid single page. Maybe I'll put that in the video. Like, it seems kind of sickening, but honestly, this is a great use of people who died of causes outside his control. Nothing in this story indicates that anyone, especially rulers, give a shit about people living or dead. Right before his final act in life, we learn that he's kind of tried to keep said murders down to those who were selfishly searching for the same MacGuffin that he was, those who were just going out of their way to kill people to find it. But yeah, in the end, he does destroy an entire city with a giant mech. And kind of like Char from Gundam, you can see how he is influenced by his own hatred towards others, killing people who have no right to die. On his relationship with Erika, he relates with her because she feels bad about murdering those who have done unforgivable wrongs, basically telling her it's okay to be evil to those who are evil. So, maybe not the best relationship for a child, even though he was sticking up for her when she wouldn't stick up for herself. We're going to cap at these two characters because I don't need to spend another month writing out this episode. Next, I'd like to talk about the action. Kishido does a great job at displaying movement to an unexpected degree. If you're familiar with manga or comics, you'll know what focus lines, motion lines, speed lines, etc. are, even if you don't know what they were called. They help translate or emphasize character and object intensity and movement, but there are two sides to that pendulum. One being so much movement that you neither understand nor care what's happening in panels or pages, or little to no lines that you have zero idea how a character or object got from one place to another. Looking at you, Go Tanabe, with your terrible manga adaptation of At the Mountains of Madness. There were a few pages throughout the story which initially confused me with abrupt action, but after looking back at previous, seemingly still panels, I noticed the action had already started, which makes sense. If someone is acting upon something in reality, nobody will notice it until after it's started. I'll throw in 2 pages of uni that best display this. And while I don't have them in front of me, you can see in one panel that Uni is kind of trying to jerk away from someone who has a grip on her. And in a following panel, you can see that she is still moving. She's the only thing in the room that looks like it's actively moving. And then all of a sudden, we just get this whole page of her kind of being in the middle of attacking multiple people. So this was one of the ones that I was like, wait, how do we go from like still to action, only to realize, okay, the action was always happening. Now, the action throughout the manga is very well done, no matter how simple or grandiose. If panels aren't shown, it's for emphasis. So if there are gaps, which I'll post something in the video, yeah, it's just because they're trying to really emphasize what's happening. If you get a little confused, just slightly backtrack and you'll likely find that motion had already started. Lastly, I'd quickly like to address the attention to detail. Everything that is or happens seems to be very well thought out. Every character, except literal cannon fodder, is recognizable and has noticeable and sometimes fun traits. I'll use the weirdest character from the uni panels as an example. Engineer Mulatto has the body of a mechanical worm suspended from the ceiling with tons of arms, some ending in tools and others with hands. But the midsection has a coat draped on it. It ain't much, but is seen in 2 panels and gives me the impression that this inhumane character is holding on to something like humanity. Another detail in the second panel is actually a grip that is used later. The panel that pays this off shows that there was something like facial skin on his mechanical head, and when the electronic brain is pulled out, it also pulls his face into his head. That's a lot of world building in like one spot, kind of showing you how little or much flesh are on some of these things. The balance of backstory, development, and drama deserves a chef's kiss. There's always something twisted about Erika and non-violent about Baron Muster, so what might be a twist in some stories is not so twisty in this. Especially on reread, I was like, yeah, this all fits within the character or settings. The manufactured blindsiding in some stories gets old, so when an author can surprise you with standout details made to be noticed, it really makes me happy and really improves the reading experience. Particularly when it came to Yoko's backstory reveal. A lot of build-up went into that, and it's so obvious, but I was still surprised and had fun with that. On the cool end is the entirely mechanical anthropomorphic warthog sergeant. You Ninja Turtles fans can't lie. You would totally do something like this if we had the tech. That's probably enough for now. This is, I guess, technically an episode, even though it's kind of approached from a Taquito mindset. Whatever, it's part of a series. I'll do what I want. That said, I haven't spoiled anything specific, only generally. Hopefully, this is some motivation to check out anything in the Battle Alita franchise, even if it's just the 2019 movie. But do yourself a favor and go watch the original OVA. I'll do some likes. The onomatopoeias are mostly in both Japanese and English. I normally don't like when they're totally replaced in English because it's often boring. Not as stylized as the Japanese, who will work their onomatopoeias into the art, into full panels, into the world, or like break or join panels with onomatopoeias. This was a really cool solution that I never knew I'd cared about. I don't think I've seen this before. It's either one or the other. Usually, if it's like only Japanese in an English translated manga, they'll just have a footnote saying what it is and what it's trying to convey, which is also cool because it's not ruining it. Once again, there are translation and history notes in each afterword, providing meanings or pointing the reader to exactly the volume and chapter something was mentioned in. So it's great, like, if you forgot something or if you don't know something, it's this kind of tiny nudge where it's like, maybe go check out something else. But once again, it's not constantly like forcing you to be lost so that you have to, okay, well, let me trek through this entire multi-arc series just to figure out what the hell's going on right now in the past. And I'm also going to do observations, not complaints. I don't really have complaints about this. I really enjoyed this and think most people would. Even on a second read through, it remains entertaining. However, some stuff that sticks out: if a villainous character is given any real page time, their motivations are generally good or like justified. The bounty hunter Guillotine is the exception, but he's also not really a villain, just a dude with a job. Two of the vehicles that move the story along are dudes in cages. Now, I think this kind of does a lot for Erika's character because of how differently she treats them. One is like a pet who she has a crush on, while the other is kind of like a father or older brother figure who she actively tries to get killed. On that same note, all three doctors in here are similar degrees of twisted. It took the second reading to pay that any mind, but yeah, just kind of an odd thing. I had a note earlier where it kind of reminds me of Tite Kubo, the guy who did Bleach, where like Bleach is just the same story over and over and over again, just redressing the characters. And this isn't quite to that degree, but there are a lot of characters where they're just kind of copy pasted versions. For a couple of fun pop culture references, there's a ship turned into like housing area called the Deja Thoris. It's the name of the Princess of Mars in Edgar Rice Burroughs novels. Is that like Prince of Mars? It's the movie. We had a movie on it. Erika is referred to as Little Kurt Russell, and there is a panel showing the first Northern Expedition, which was a battle that happened on Mars. They go into plenty of it, which might be referencing Space Battleship Yamato and Gundam. It looked like both of those combined. For references that were used, Wikipedia did not get used much this time, mostly because I disagreed with how their synopsis was worded. But two of the sites, which I will link, are Ukitopia, that's the main website for the creator, and then Ripper's Anime Forum is the one where they are still translating individual chapters that are not yet available in English. So it's really cool that these exist as a medium to allow people to read it. And it's kind of odd. I almost feel like Kodansha should do weekly or monthly. However often this is getting released at any time, like that way there is an official version out there that has, the notes and stuff like that. I haven't really looked through the scanlations to see if they do any of the references or German translation, but that is one of my favorite little things about the official manga, is there footnotes that tell you what this is in reference to, and then at the end, the translation, someone will say a word that doesn't seem to have much meaning, but it's like, oh, this is what that means, and you're like, cool, a little bit extra. It's nice. Moving on to Nacho Business. I definitely made some mistakes over the past few months, put a little too much time into Horizon 2, which I may not even finish. I started and finished the entire Southern Reach trilogy. Would recommend book 1 for sure. The sequels aren't completely necessary, so that's up to you. 2 is kind of a job to get through. And 3 seems to do kind of improve upon what 2 is trying to do. So, I don't know. It's kind of worth it to finish it, but honestly, the first one is just so good. Like, Annihilation, the movie is great. Annihilation, the book is great. So check out at least the first book of Southern Reach trilogy. I was gone pretty much all of June, being home for maybe like 5 days. And then over the course of 6 weekends, I was really only home for one. Well, I say that, but the 6th weekend is upcoming when I'm going to Tallahassee. So yeah, there's been a lot of strain lately. On the plus side, I finally have a website for my photo business, ktorgesonphotography.com. It'll be in the show notes. It's not 100%, but it's good enough for the military. That took an entire solid week of just me sitting, 8 to 12 hours a day, digging through all of my photos and kind of figuring out how I wanted this to look, editing, re-editing. I'm sure you know what that's like. I started the video game Sea of Stars and the book Bookshops and Bone Dust. Both recommends. Travis Baldry is great. Bookshops and Bone Dust is the pre-sequel to Legends and Lattes. Sea of Stars is an indie game. So much fun. I'm like 5 or 6 bosses deep now. Great graphics, and it took me so long to get it because I ordered the physical copy. So I had to wait for that to come in and then wait to actually be done with the website and traveling to play it. There will eventually be an episode on what goes into making this podcast and like thoughts on the process. But for now, one of the weirdest things about podcasting is how difficult it can be to just enjoy other stuff. I was never going to make an episode on the Southern Reach trilogy. That was just a personal thing of I am going to finish this before I go on my long trip, and finish it I did. Thought maybe I could do the same with Horizon 2, but finish it I did not. So now that time kind of feels wasted. Both were at the sacrifice of producing this episode. It's weird how this kind of happens. Also, like the necessity of having to work on a motorcycle, doing something I've never done before, like repairs and replacements that were simple in the long run, but like if you don't know how to do it, there's just enough complexity to it where like it can take a while to figure out precisely the order in which something should be done. But you can find me with camera in hand at Ocala Comic Con, Infinity Con Gainesville, and Spookala. All of them are later this year. Really hoping I get to shake Alan Tudyk's hand. That's all I really want from Spookala. He is going to be at Collective Con next year. Maybe we'll get to shake his hand again. Hey, if you want to get in contact with me, you can always reach out on every social media platform by searching Twimby Podcast or emailing me at twimbypodcast@gmail.com. Again, the spelling is TWIMB. The world is my burrito. Now that I made a photo website, maybe I should make one for the podcast for no reason other than to do it. Yeah, that's about it.